Thank you for joining us, Richard. Obviously, I think everybody who's read through our announcement, I mean, you're a true legend in the animation space, and Min met you because you were part of a panel at OpenAI's forum recently, which also speaks a lot to this sort of moment of how these major industry events are also becoming moments where a lot of people that have been building in previous paradigms are also welcome and contributing to trying to figure out where all this is headed. I know you weren't at Pixar, but it's just the common reference of the blink of Pixar. Everybody's or the new Pixar, but you've been in comparable institutions. So if I may kind of remind people, and you sent me your CV, which I had to use some type of summary tool because there's just too much on there to read out loud. But you're the co-founder of Pacific Data Images, which became DreamWorks Animation. I think most of us have heard of that. And you spent nearly 3 decades helping invent the technology that made modern CG filmmaking possible. And you served as VP and CTO, building the PDI core production pipeline from the ground up. And you racked up 16 VFX supervisor credits along the way, including the first ever full-body digital stunt double for Batman Forever. A lot of us remember that. And that work earned him 2 Academy Technical Achievement Awards and an Emmy. And the pipeline work underpins all the way through Shrek. So just incredible walk through most of our childhoods of movies we've all seen and some of our recent films. And then since leaving DreamWorks, you haven't stopped building. You founded CloudPick to advance distributed digital content creation. You've been consulting for studios across Asia and the US. You've taught AR and VR at the University of Silicon Valley, and you've been advising at Beijing Film Academy. It goes on and on. You've been at SIGGRAPH Asia. You've been a speaker to OpenAI. I'm really hoping my summary tool did a good job. Please fact check if it ever hallucinated. I think those things all sound very real to me. But big welcome to Gen Talks. Grateful to Min for making the introduction. I know you kind of have a bit of a presentation you've done today, but I want everybody, as usual, to feel like this is a conversation. So I'll be mindful of the chat as people have questions, and we'll bring you up if you want to introduce yourselves. But I'll turn over the mic to you, Richard. Tell us of what's going on with you. What are your journeys, and what can you share with us today?
One other thing thank you again for having an old guy talk about, the new stuff. And it's been a real journey for me all my life. And my slide deck is very, very cramped because I'm an old guy, so I have a lot of stuff. But what I want to do is just basically touch on the topic of how to deal with this inflection when things are changing so quickly. And through my slide, hopefully I can get a sense of that. I've been through this many times in my whole career. So maybe I'll just share my slide somehow.
Please do. Yeah.
Sorry, I have to figure out how to do this.
So on the bottom, there should be a little
share
kind of
screen.
the share button in the end. Yeah, you
Yes,
can do.
I
Yeah,
will
I
do
think.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Can you see it? Okay, great. So this is sort of an updated version of something I talked about at Asia SIGGRAPH just a couple of months ago. It's really about how to deal with innovation at a time of change. And it's more important today than ever before, but I went through this so many times in my career, so I'll try to speed run through this, right? Just to give you an incident how this all got transpired. About 3.5 years ago, October 2022, I gave a talk at Stanford, and this is 2022, and they wanted me to give a talk about the state of the digital film industry. So I made up all my slide with generative AI. I'm a hacker, so I had it running on my home computer back in 2022. And all these images were generated. And I put on my slide deck and I gave the talk. At the end of the talk, I said, hey, by the way, these were all AI generated. And back in 2022 at Stanford, people were totally confused what I was talking about. And that didn't seem like that long ago. But you guys all know, I mean, this is a group that knows exactly where we are today, so I'm not going to dwell on it. So, back in December 2025, I have a good friend of mine who's the founder of Silverside, and he was explaining to me how they did the Coke commercial, and they actually made money on it. And it's really impressed me that people so quickly can take a cutting edge technology and turn to a viable business. I mean, a lot of you guys probably laugh at this stuff being looking very dated and so forth because the technology changed so quickly. But I was impressed by the fact that they actually made a profit building a team to do this project in a very short time. So I'll go through my history of how I had to face similar challenges through my career, and it's been sort of nonstop since I started. Just a little background, I came from Hong Kong originally. I was raised by a single mom who was an entrepreneur, but she always told me, always follow your passion and never stop learning, which was the motivation for all my life. And my background is actually in fine art, not technology as most people think. These are some of my painting, including a mural I painted in New York City. Down below is on Canal Street in the Chase Bank. I painted back in 1977. It's a 56-foot mural that I painted for my uncle, who was a watercolor designer. But I painted that in 1977. So my background is actually fine art before I touched the computer. I first got exposed to computer in 74, so later on, computer became a hobby of mine while I was still very entrenched in art. When I went to college, I initially wanted to be an artist, but computer was always my hobby. So when I took my first job, I took a job where I had no idea what they were talking about when I interviewed, and which has nothing to do with what I learned in school and so forth. So RF and microwave lab at HP. So for all of you in the creative world, this means absolutely nothing. But for me, it was a challenge, learning something I knew nothing about. So I worked there for 3 years, and then I started PDI. Three of us got together and decided to start this small company that at that point, computer graphics was just become a thing, but there were no software available, nothing like that. So we decided one of my partner, the main guy who founded PDI, Carl Rosendahl, his family's in the oil business, and they had the money, so they bought a computer, a PDP 1144, 128K of memory, and it had zero software on it. In fact, we had to load up a early version of Unix to run it. So what I did was I wrote the rendering software. Me and Glenn wrote the scripting software, and we built a platform that we can make picture. Because we had this intuition that computer will become the the machine of creative work, right? No different than people today think AI will be the machine for creative work going in the future. But we were in the onset of when computer become viable for doing creative work. So we built our first platform, but back then you couldn't really do human or anything or character for that matter. Really, basically television graphics. And I wrote a renderer that were way better than any other renderer out there for doing television graphics because we were able to handle interlaced television at 60 field per second. So we had the highest quality graphics. So we sort of took over the uh, graphics business for television for all the major network. And it was quite an accomplishment at the time. So we became profitable very early because we targeted a market that fitted the limit of what our technology can do. We pushed the limit, but we didn't try to do things that were not practical. So then, we expanded, we bought a bigger computer, but back then we had to record things onto videotape frame by frame. Unlike you guys now who use, just FFmpeg or something and create a video, to put computer work onto, either in the old days, people would put on film one by one, but we couldn't afford a film recorder because we're just a startup of three guys. We're completely self-funded. In fact, in the history of PDIT, we were bought by DreamWorks. We never got outside funding. It was all based on our initial pocket funding and then the revenue we generated from our business. So to record something onto like animation, we had to record on the 1-inch tape and actually wrote the assembly code on the microprocessor you saw on the lower right to control the video deck so we can pre-roll the tape and record one frame at a time. I mean, this is ancient history for most of you, but that's how we started. And these are some of the earliest images that my renderer generated and back then. And to do that, we didn't think about just one thing, right? It's no different than you use stable diffusion or some model from, seat dance or something like that to generate imagery. To really do production is way more than that. So what we had to do was build a workflow that takes you from beginning to end. in terms of complete. So within this workflow, I wrote a lot of the code. I wrote the animation tool. I wrote the compositor. This was before Photoshop even came out. I wrote a script-based compositor. I wrote the renderer that rendered the image, as well as the first ever, I think, in the history of computer graphics, the interactive lighting tool. And that was based on the need of satisfying client, because with client that, we're changing the mind constantly. And as you guys know, if you're working with a client with generative AI, you're going to lose a lot of hair doing it because to make concise change is very difficult. So I wrote an interactive lighting editor that allow artists to interactively work with a client to change the lighting. That was back in 1984, very long time ago. So we sort of dominated the television graphics business at that point. Then actually in 85, actually, this is an interesting story. And you guys probably, will go through similar phase. Nilo Rodis, a very famous art director from Empire Strike Back, came to me and said, "Hey, do you think we can make an all computer generated movie?" And me and Nilo actually went to George Lucas at the ranch in his office and pitched it to him. And actually, initially, I thought Nilo would gone to Pixar because George at that point owned the group from Pixar. But Nilo really felt like they didn't really understand traditional filmmaking, and they were more into this new thing called computer animation. So we actually, because some of my background, I won't get into it right now, but I understood a little bit more about filmmaking than somehow. And Nilo really enjoyed working with me. So we went to George and pitched him the idea of making an all computer generated film in 1985. And George basically laughed us out of his office. He said, like, nobody would want to watch that, right? And that was the end of that story. But but what that triggered was my mind thinking how I can make a complete film very cost effectively. Then in 1986, you guys all know what Monday Night Football is. I did something that people finally get to do today. I actually did a project completely by myself, end to end. I did the storyboard because of my art background. I pitched it to ABC. I got awarded the work. I did all the work myself, and I did the complete project by myself, which is something that traditionally people never do. So, so that was one experience that it was quite a learning experience. All deep in my mind, ever since then, is how can you do a complete project on your own? And we are getting closer, but still not quite there yet. And I'm always trying to reinvent things. Like I created the first ever facial lip animation system working with Howard Baker, a very successful director now. And in terms of building a tool to do character animation, this is one of the first character animation tool ever built in the history of computer graphics. And it's made for not people with technical skills, but for artists. Howard came from traditional animation. He just sketched out the face and then animated the face on a character. But you still won't find anything like that today. We did some of the earlier work. This is with Jim Henson. Again, something that never been done before is Jim came to us and said, hey, can we do real-time puppeteering with computer graphics? And so we actually built a custom rig to do real-time puppeteering with Jim Henson. And actually, in the Jim Henson hour, one of the character, Waldo, was actually generated with computer graphics and motion capture in real time. This is back in 1988. Again, somebody came to us with a problem that, not problem, but a creative challenge that never been done before. We came up with a solution. In fact, we were the first company that ever did a CG animated Mickey Mouse. Wasn't Disney or Pixar, but it was actually us. We did the animated Mickey Mouse at the end of Jim Henson theme park ride. So I keep reinventing the system. Like in 89, wrote the animation system had no numbers, no curve. It was all just posing and animation. So we keep testing the water, trying out different things. Because in my mindset, it's not just about one specific area, but how we can go end to end from idea to delivery. So we updated hardware in '89 and we wrote all the user interface. So these are all tools that I built and pretty much by myself, the whole user interface and the whole animation tool and the lighting tool. And we wrote everything when newer computer came out. This is the first SGI came out. We also did a lot of firsts on visual effects. We did visual effects for uh, early film because back then, no, we had besides ILM, very few people really got into doing visual effects. So we had to actually build our own film printer. That was very complicated, and I won't get into all the detail. So we continued to do a lot of first work. We did the first Morph animated commercial. We did a lot of Morph with Michael Jackson and his lot of his quite a few of his video we worked on. Then in 1990, I got to exercise my dream from '85 to do a complete show using computer graphics. So we got a project to do a Halloween special with with Mars Candy, and we actually did a complete. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background here. We did a computer animated character mixed with live action Halloween special, which we eventually won an Emmy Award. And again, this is things that people never done before. A long format film that had multiple shots with integrated CG and live action. And we had to really build the whole workflow. In fact, I wrote this pipeline by myself in 2 weeks because I've been thinking about 5 years. So one day I decided, okay, we get can do this project. I had to build the whole workflow. So I sat down and wrote the whole pipeline. And then we went on and did many other firsts too. We did the first Homer Simpsons 3D, the Coke commercial on the lower left. I did the first ever animated character in the live action commercial. And again, we did first Pillsbury Doughboy and many other things. So in 94, right around 92, 93 timeframe, Joe Schumacher was doing the film Batman Forever. And they wanted to test if how far we can push computer graphics. And one of the things was they say, okay, can we do a digital stunt with a human replaced by CG? And the image you see here is from the test. They look very dated and old right now. I mean, it's laughable today when you look at it, but back then it's never been done before. So I had to do a test competing with all the other studios to prove that we can do it better than everybody else. And I won the job. So we actually did a digital human stunt double for the main character. I mean, people have used a digital character and background, things like that, or weird creatures and so forth. But we actually did a digital stunt Batman. It was all done with motion capture. It was very primitive back then. So, and back later on in Batman and Robin, I ended up doing it much more. There were many more shots were done with digital human, mixed in with live action and miniature and various things. So again, doing things that never been done before is sort of where we are today. So again, went on did a lot of commercials and so forth. Ended up supervising a lot of live action film on set. So I'm more a passion for live action, to be honest, than I am with animation. Because I'm really working with the creative team on projects and being on set, working with the director is not always easy. It's very hard work. But to me, I learned so much about filmmaking being on set with some of these great directors and filmmakers. Then we made our first animated film, Ants. And, it's one of these things that you guys probably all face in making AI work today. Is I still remember when we started Ants, one day the producer came to my office and she said, Richard, we have we have people are panicking because we don't think we know how to make this film. Okay. And I say, okay, we got this far not because we didn't know, we got this far because we want to make it. So I got everybody together, put them in the big meeting room, and we went through one by one, pointing out what everybody's role is on the project, so we know how we can support each other to make this possible. Right? This is a team of people who have never made an animated film before. Right? It's the first time, and we don't understand the technology wasn't ready, the workflow wasn't ready, but we all believe that between all of us, we'll figure it out. So after we went through that long meeting where we identified what everybody's roles were and how we supported each other, we went back and we made the movie. And it was done with very low-end technology. In fact, people didn't believe we did it the way we did it. We had a 10 megabit network and 1280 shots, and we only used 1.5 terabyte of data for the whole film. That's unheard of in today's format. because when I wrote the software for compositing, imaging, and rendering, back then we couldn't afford the big computer like all these other companies that had the money, even though they all went out of business eventually. But were very conservative. Instead of storing film with these high dynamic range imagery, I decided to use a 10-bit JPEG, which is not standard even in today's world. But 10-bit JPEG can give you enough dynamic range so you can put something on film that looks like has enough uh, dynamic range to match the output of film. So we actually did everything in 10-bit JPEG, and people always thought that was crazy, but it worked. You define a solution that match what your limitation is, and you work around those problems. So we did a lot of innovative work on that project. Then 96, I actually did something even more crazy. My uncle was doing an autobiography, and he needed somebody to direct Charleston Heston on this autobiography, and I volunteered to do it. So I had a chance to direct Charleston Heston. This is just a side note. So when you do making film, you can try all kinds of crazy things. I've never done this before. It was so scary getting in front of camera trying to direct somebody like Charleston Heston. But I tell you, it was an experience I'll never forget. That was back in 96. So right after, that's right before we started Shrek. That's when, through the period, that's when DreamWorks ended up buying us. So Shrek was another one of these projects was way bigger than anything we could ever imagine. So we scaled it up and we used our know-how. We made the movie, and it was quite a learning experience. Again, always doing something you never done before. That's my story whole life. And we did. Then we went on and made many other films using our pipeline. And in 2022 and 23, I realized it was a global world because you guys may be too young to know it. Before the 2000, before internet, Hollywood only think Hollywood exists in LA and maybe Canada. But so the world didn't exist. But because I'm a geek, I understood the impact of the social network and how the internet's connecting the world. I pitched to Jeffrey Katzenberg. I said, look, we really need to collectively work with people around the world. It's a global economy. So I went around, and most of Hollywood executives sort of poo-pooed it, and they sort of say, no, we don't want to waste our time on it. But I convinced Jeffrey that we should start doing that. So I went travel around the world and met with all these studios. And in fact, some of these are very famous ones. I won't get into it. And then we decided to do a film, TV series, sorry, of DreamWorks' first TV series, which again something we never done before at DreamWorks. So most executives were mostly from film. None of them really knew how to do TV. So I didn't know that till after the project started. So I had to jump between, my office in Palo Alto all the way to uh, Burbank and overseas. And originally, my first choice was the studio in Paris that eventually made the Minions, but because of schedule, they weren't available. So we drift down several, and we ended up with our third choice, which is a studio in Hong Kong. Even though people say, "Oh, you're from Hong Kong, we were biased," but they weren't my first choice. But nevertheless, we had them working with us to do a TV series called Father of the Pride. Again, that's something we never done before. We didn't have a pipeline for doing global production. But PDI had one of the first remote production studio in the industry because we had an LA office and as well as an office in Sunnyvale. So we had a remote office even back in the 80s. So we understood that. And I wrote the first ever remote collaborative video system so people can view the whole film on the desktop from any computer simultaneously and collaborate and make notes and see each other's note in real time. And that was, in the early 90s when I did that. So we understood the workflow of having the distributed studio very well. So we have a studio in Hong Kong. We did this TV series, but this series didn't go that far for a lot of reasons beyond our control. So, but again, it was a exercise in pushing the limit. So I did things like I wrote the first ever web-based project viewing tool for the whole studio. This pissed up a lot of producer because this allowed every animator to see the status of every shot on every film at the desk without having to go to editorial. Because I just, use video playback of all the shots collectively. It'll find the latest on status on every shot and show whatever's available, either storyboard or animation or rough or final render. Doesn't matter. It let anybody at the desktop to see the whole film. And I also wrote our first ever studio-wide management system while I was flying between all the studio because I got tired of how slow Hollywood were managing projects. So I wrote a schedule mentoring program that actually allow us to manage like 20,000 tasks in real time. This is all written in real-time computer graphics, so it's a big key part of it. But so I did a lot of that. Then I helped DreamWorks set up studio all over the world. I helped them set up the remote studio in India, again, based on my experience in remote working. But one thing I really learned is that it's important to have a team to work together, right? Because like any collaborative tool, I'm a real believer in working with people who challenge each other to push the limit, right? If you just sit there by yourself, you fall just like you become like AI. You fall into local minimum very easily, and you lose track of the bigger picture. So to really push the limit, unless Steven Spielberg or something like that, you really need to have a team of people that push. Even Steven, okay, let me take that back. Even Steven is one of these persons who really understand the importance of a team. I still remember the first time I was on set with him, being the nervous kid. He said, kept asking him all these questions. I kept asking Stephen, you want this, you want this? And he just looked at me. He goes, Richard, you're here because you know what you're doing. Don't ask me. Do what you think is right. This film is only great when everybody at their best. So I really believe that. So I left DreamWorks in 2008. I went on and started up. I ran a studio all over the place. I ran a studio in again, this was one of these crazy thing, right? You guys always talk about making stuff faster. This was a studio in Taipei called Next Media Animation. They would do the animated news. Some of you might have seen it about these animated news that became released in the news of about 5, 6 years, well, 10 years ago. Well, more than 10 years now. Okay. And they were because they were not really financially doing that well. They're looking for someone to help turn them around. So I took the job and helped turn the studio around. And they were doing a story from the break of the news story to the part where they deliver an HD finished work of a story. It's not the highest quality, but nevertheless, they turn it all around in 3 hours. Okay. If I ask you today to turn the story around in 3 hours, even with AI, you'll be pushing it, right? So, but these guys figured out a system, do 3 hours. When I met with the guy who owned it, and he said, Richard, if any way you can make this cheaper and faster, that would be great. So I went there and I worked with the team. Cost is very important because they can't really afford really expensive stuff. So we use very low end technology, like all the facial capture, doing a webcam, a motion capture using a uh, like camera from the Microsoft gaming system. So it's all consumer hardware. Everything was done in real time. So eventually, I helped them set up a studio to do mobile content in Japan as well. This is a different business altogether. And then we built a real-time pipeline. Okay. And this was back in 2012, long before Unreal had their own virtual production pipeline. So we sort of hacked together Unreal, Maya, and a real-time database, and we built this real-time pipeline. And we actually did a real-time test. We did a real-time show between Taiwan and Tokyo with a performer were performing in front of these really low-cost setup and doing real-time character. And we were doing the motion capture and everything. And the writer were monitoring the internet for hashtag feedback from the audience. And during that time, what they would do is update the script so the performers can watch the line on the teleprompter. So they don't know what they could be saying, the next minute because the writers are updating in real time, right? So this is the ultimate speed for creating content. I mean, obviously the quality is nowhere near what you guys used to seeing today. But imagine taking this with today's technology, you can do some amazing thing. But again, this was 2012. Here's some of the stuff from that. We were doing a real-time show. It's very low quality given today's standard, but this was done with very low cost hardware that made it practical. Okay, I was also doing a lot of AR content work as well. I did AR content for newspaper, magazine, and again, this is 2013, right? And this stuff still hasn't really fully taken hold even today, but I'm constantly pushing the cutting edge. And then the other challenge back then was mobile content, right? To do mobile content, you have to be very cost efficient, and I'll deal with all the costs. So I helped set up a bunch of mobile studio all over Asia that were able to do mobile content at the right value so they can actually make money. I mean, you can spend a lot of money on something, but if you don't make money, it's pointless. So again, I helped set up a lot of studio that were able to optimize the workflow so they can actually be profitable in content. So in 15, 16, I actually did an AR project for the Peterson Museum in LA. Most of you probably know that museum very well. And this was for kids. They licensed a Pixar character, which was pretty funny for me to be using Pixar character on a project. But I wrote most of the code myself and did most of the animation. My son actually wrote the framework for me, and I did a lot of I've never written an AR program before, so I wrote an AR program from scratch, and it was actually all done with in WebGL on using JavaScript. So after that, I advised a lot of company. I started winding down my tired running business, so I've been advising a lot of startup in various fields. I taught AR VR course at Silicon Valley, and go back. And I gave a lot of talk. I mean, I gave talk on AR/VR and AI in various fields. I got back to do some medical conference. I actually chaired a session on AI at a medical conference. So I spent a lot of my time trying to help other people push the limit. I'm getting old enough where it's hard for me to do it myself. So I'm trying to encourage the next generation. And you guys are the future generation, and some of you may be old guy like me, but nevertheless, I'm always trying to push the envelope. And this is sort of a synopsis of my history, right? I first learning math back with abacus in '64. I mean, that was a long time ago. And and I was on the next computer advisory board for 3D when Steve Jobs started it. So that's my early years. I went through a lot of changes, right? But even on the next computer, only a 16 megabyte of memory. Recently, before all the price went up, I bought a AMD HX370 uh, tiny computer with about $1,000, 96 gig of memory on it. Obviously, you can't do that today because the price has more than jumped up 8 times. But the compute power between that and the computer I started PDI with had 10 billion times faster floating point. Okay, and you guys think AI is the only thing that have accelerated growth? Believe me, it's always been like that. AI's ramp may be a new ramp, but the world has been ramping up like that, at least in most of my lifetime. So I don't take it like something too new, but rather than, okay, here we go again, right? It's just same thing every time. And it's 10 billion times faster. It's crazy. And okay. So we went through a time of change. I went through this, and okay, this is a media stuff. I won't talk about this. This is more about business, but I won't skip that. But I'll talk about in the old days, we take ideas, we go for producer, studio, distributor, marketing, and consumer, and then reach the consumer, right? We're reaching a point now, an idea should reach the consumer much more directly. It sounds good, but it's not so trivial, right? And this is a slide I made about 10 years ago, and talk about the cost, right? Film budgets are in terms of $1 million per minute. Animated TV series were 10K to 30K per minute. This is roughly numbers from about 10 years ago. And then back then I say, okay, for mobile animation, you have to make it for less than $1,000 per minute. Okay. And even today, that's a hard thing to do. But, I got several studios to be able to do that. And you have to reduce the production time from 1 week down to real time to do that. And the studio I work with, and I was a creative producer on this project in Singapore. They did an Oddbot series. And they were able to get it to deliver a new show every day at about $2,500 per minute. So the new business, the in the new media market, it could be like 1,000-time improvement over what a filmmaking is. That's why when in the early 2010 and mid that period, I went to talk to Hollywood producer, and they just laughed at me, say, "We can never be 100. We can be 10 times faster. That's pushing it. 100 times, and we can't even imagine it. 1,000 times, you got to be joking." So none of those meetings go anywhere. So now I saw talk about the ABC of age of AI, right? This is how I think about AI from my perspective. And the first part of AI is assistant production, right? Second one is builder with AI. Most of you probably builder with AI. You take AI and you build content with it. It's not traditional production assisted with AI. But then the next step is to create it by AI completely without the people involvement. Let me explain that. Right? Assistant production is tools for filmmaker, right? And things like Disney have been using 2D style transfer of the 2D animation for like the 6 years now. Most of you probably don't know that. Disney actually used it because the animators don't have to learn a new style. They just animate in the traditional style. They feed it through AI style transfer. They get a whole new style. So that's been actually been around for a while. It's funny and very few people know about that. And there's things like something we introduced just a couple of weeks ago, Corridor Key, right from the Corridor crew, the visual effects people online. They released a really good AI tool for doing compositing, right? It does really good green screen with water and all that. But there's a funny story for me about that because there was a company 10 years ago that raised tons of money. We're going to do the same thing. Say we're going to replace um, well, less than 10 years, about 8 years ago, because that's when AI started to really ramp up. They said we can replace all this work with AI, like green screen and all that. And I looked at it and I said, well, you guys would never succeed because I have done a lot of green screen in my lifetime. And 90% of the green screen are no brainer. It just works. And there's 10% that's really hard. But even what Corridor Key produced wouldn't solve the biggest problem I face. I still remember Joe Schumacher called me up one day and say, Richard, I'm not going to shoot this shot till you come down on set and tell me I can shoot it. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger in the chrome suit, Mr. Freeze. And when you shoot somebody in a chrome suit on a set with a green screen, it's not like he's transparent where what you can see through him. How do you deal with that? So the corridor key, as good as it is, still can't solve that problem. But that's another story altogether. And then there's like Ben Affleck's company that sold to Netflix, right? Interpositive, right? I think that's the thing that I really thought about for a lot too, and I sort of understand where they're coming from. And Ben's a very geeky guy, so it's good to see that he's doing this. But I've sort of summarized this, and for a traditional filmmaker, there's a lot of great usage for something like this, right? I'll do a simple illustration, right? I can now shoot something with me in a pajama, literally, and then I can go and use AI to now reset the scene, do the lighting, change the clothing, redo the lighting, right? And that's not AI generated acting, right? It's just a traditional actor, but they don't have to worry about makeup, costume, lighting, set dressing. I just shoot a bunch of people performing. I mean, this is what I feel should be done. The tool's not quite there yet. I won't get into the reason why, but this is just I took a simple image to illustrate the point. So if you're going to make live action film, you can just shoot a bunch of actor, which will give you the emotional performance that's really hard to get with AI. And now you can, style transfer or whatever technique you're using to a very finished film, right? So this again just assists in production, right? And now you guys are builders, and you see like here's some of the example winners from just recently in the AI International Film Festival. People are now building complete content, right, with AI, and that's a whole different way of doing things, right? There's no difference than in the early days when we did computer graphics. We replaced the people who did motion graphics completely with computer graphics. But there's a point where you overlap with other technology, but there's also places where you do something completely with this new technology, right? So this is something you guys all know much more about it than I am. I'm just a hack that's learning all this stuff, right? But then the next step beyond this part I won't get into, is we generate everything with AI. I mean, I've been approached by people who said, "Hey, Richard, can we build a complete agentic network?" This is some quote big studio because they own all these IP. They say, "Hey, can we build an automatic pipeline that generate these IP that we own and automatically update the script, update the scene breakdown, update the generated content, and stream it out, and we get the feedback and automatically the feedback and update the pipeline, right?" This is just a rough. Don't take this pipeline for granted. But this is another step that's beyond what a lot of you are thinking, right? But studio are thinking this way. They say, hey, we own all these IP, we can milk money from it, right? Why not build an automated pipeline that are totally free of human involvement and just generate content and maybe make money from it, right? So so there's this, and that's why I call it ABC of AI. And I'm sure you guys have other great ideas as well. But to me, I sort of simplify into three categories, right? But then the problem they run into is the market saturation, right? I mean, here's a slide I made last few years ago when I gave a talk to uh, well a studio. I won't name. I can't. Okay, and the and you look through the history, the growth of YouTube, Netflix, and TikTok, the growth of you know hours of people watching this stuff is pretty great. I mean, this is back in 24. People are taking 20 billion hours per month watching this stuff, right? Not in the theater anymore, not on television anymore, but really in the theater is where the movies go, right? Traditionally. But now you have all these new content. This is 24. I don't even can't imagine what the number is today. But what happened then is, in the old days, a successful movie become this strong signal that rise about the crowd and it become very big hit, successful, it makes money. And that's how the film industry stood out, right? They make great movies that rise above the noise. Then more independent films start coming along. There's more spikes on the field. And then people say, hey, there's more theater around, good to go. But now then in recent years, we got more things like Amazon, Netflix, and so forth, streaming more content, right? The field become more and more saturated. But then what happened with AI is now AI is raising the noise floor. Okay, the amount of content noises have gone up exponentially. So what's going to happen is to stand out become much more difficult, right? So because I always believe in the 24-hour rule, right? But exponential growth in content and signal to noise ratios reduce, and the available eyeball hours doesn't really change that much because the population is not growing as like exponentially by any means. And then the return on investment drops, right? So you have to really think about being a sustainable enterprise. Because I'm old school. I think about a business when I think about this stuff. So the outlook really shorter market lifespan and exponential growth in content, and it's really a challenge to improve the signal to noise ratio. How do you make things that really stand out from the crowd, right? I don't know if you guys saw, like recently, Logan Paul put out this long video of him playing some superhero thing, right? And it just gets so boring after like the fifth shot because it's the same old thing over and over again. If everybody's doing that, how do you stand out from the crowd, right? Because that's just basically, a good prompt engineering with some tool. You can build those stuff now pretty easily. So visual saturation is a big problem. Look and feel is no longer a selling point, right? Good story and creative innovation will be the next step. So here's the opportunity, right? You have to create stability, precise creative control, repeatability and reproducibility, collaborative workflow, right? Because for me, I still believe that the creative world needs people who create things that never been seen before. Just because you can mix a bunch of stuff together, you can say, hey, nobody's seen that before. That's not quite it. Be able to tell a story, be able to evoke emotion in people in a creative way is what good filmmaker does. And that takes a lot of thinking, a lot of planning. And AI system are trained on, a lot of data, and it gives you the best average answer, but not really the cutting or the innovative answer. So you still need people involvement and creative workflow. But I think people who are really going to win out is people who can collaborate together and build a team that can push the envelope. And there's really, and then now the next thing is how to build a sustainable business model given this complex world we're on, and there's the whole legal compliance issue. So I won't get much into this, and you really have to think about how you can innovate in this space to really stand out from the crowd. But I'll go back. My first art I ever created got accepted to art show was 1983 SIGGRAPH Art Show. This image is in the SIGGRAPH Historical Archive. This was all generated with computer without my involvement. Okay. PDI first start using neural network by almost 35 years ago. Okay. So the whole concept of AI is nothing new in my mind. And this was my first computer artwork that was accepted as SIGGRAPH was actually a computer generated art. Wasn't something I did manually. I just wrote some code and generated this art and I submitted it and got accepted. So we are back to this curve that's a repeat of this loop over and over again. So it's nothing new. It's just a different track and we hope to innovate. So just wake up every day, challenge yourself, do something you've never done before. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
I think that's a good conclusion. Wow. I mean, I think I'm glad the emojis still come through in this Riverside setup. Um, it's it's incredible to take in the milestones and many of our own kind of cultural history of just things that we've um, experienced, and to know how close you were to all of them. I mean, definitely, please throw questions into the chat, and I think there is a way to come up on stage that we're going to
Yeah.
learn how to do today. I got Chaz helping me today, the super Chaz. But um, I mean, I can't help but wonder, like, especially some of those moments that, like the first digital stunt double, or these first kind of things being like, let's do a movie all digitally. Like, those things were happening in a time where I think often that moment, in whichever room it was uttered, it was often met in the dream factory energy of like, wow, what else is possible with this amazing cinema machine that we're all collectively building? Whereas today, obviously, there's a different energy. Like, there's guilds that are threatened, and there's feelings that I mostly think it's because of that graph you showed of what's going on with YouTube and Netflix. Like, I think it's more that there's a broader disruption that has affected the economics. But what observation do you have? And maybe I'm overlooking how controversial it was back then to have a digital
No,
stunt double. Maybe
it
the stunt
it was
double
very
union was saying,
controversial.
but
Uh,
can you think of, like, what are those observations you're having about these sudden moments of like, wait, you can do what, and you don't need humans for it? Like, what is your feeling about that? Which, because we're going through a lot of that right now.
well, I'll give you the Batman example, right? When we were first approached about doing that, I still remember, always in my mind that was a dream, right? But I still remember going back to my team. I say, "Hey, can we do this?" They all look at me and say, "We have no idea how to do this," right? And that's when I get excited. When we have no idea, that's like the best answer. Then they say that's gonna be fun to figure it out, right? But there's a lot of implication about doing a digital stunt double. I gave several talks in Hollywood after I did it. I still remember every talk I gave, an old guy would come up to the podium at the end. He put his business card on the podium. And he'd go like this, right? He walks away. And you pick up the card, and he's the lawyer from the Screen Actor Guild, right? Because they're very concerned. I mean, even back then, that how, I mean, there's another project I did in Hollywood, which I'm not supposed to talk about, but so I won't mention names. We actually digitally alter the performance of actors in a film, okay? And that would have been a big no-no even today, right? Because the technology, even this was like 20 years ago. 20? Yeah, 20 years ago. We were able to modify a performance digitally, right? And so at the end, when the Screen Actor Guild guy I talked to, I said, look, I'm not really interested in making more human because there's a lot, I can never match their acting ability, but I'm interested in making character that you've never seen before, right? That's actually been more fun. That's how we made a lot of interesting creatures and animated character, and is you're bringing things to life that's not already alive, right? And so, yeah, it's more of an issue now because the whole, you know, the rights of content, right, of imagery, right, of people, and sound and music and so forth is a much bigger, complex problem. I mean, the question I raised at OpenAI when we had this discussion, I say, look, if you guys can do one thing that would help us quite a bit, if you actually can build something that identify any type of work as being generated artificially, right, with AI, that would be a big step forward. But they all admit they have no idea how to do that, which is a big concern. So
Super interesting. I mean, I can't help but even the way you just framed that answer, that where your interest was doing things that were impossible or doing new things. I mean, I tend to think that that's the optimistic energy in a lot of the AI work, is that personally, I mean, I'd let everybody speak for themselves, but I get excited when I see it, like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. Like, and that tends to be like the feeling we have about Hollywood or movies. It seems like there's unfortunately this sort of pressure point that a lot of studios and producers let this other entity on their other shoulder come in and say, like, wait, maybe I don't need all these people that I hired anymore. And that is this sort of ugly narrative of where this is entering.
yeah,
Super interesting. I mean, and maybe one more question for me, and I'm going to start going through the questions in the group, I promise. But um, I find it so interesting that you have a fine art background, and that you clearly are equally, if not much more, with the work you've done, than establish yourself as some version of a technologist, and then obviously the perspective adds up to a really unique place in the world for you. Like, what do you think is like what would you say to a lot of people now that are entering spaces where, I think I heard you say, I don't know how many times in your presentation, like, we'd never done this before. Like, we didn't even know how this worked. Like that kind of, like, I hear that a lot in our spaces, that we're just like, wait, I don't know, is this even supposed to do this? Like, what would you say is the operative muscle in that setting? Like, what is the sort of the super skill
this
that
this
we all need to sort of hone as we
this
enter those spaces?
for me. I mean, I just recently at Asia SIGGRAPH they gave me a lifetime, y- you know, a, achievement award. And I finally did a post on LinkedIn. I said, look, this is to thank all the people I've met in my career that I learned from. It's not about what I've done. It's about all the people I met that I learned from, how inspire me and help taught me how to solve these problems, right? I'm a real believer that you work with people, right? People nowadays is shifting this weird thinking that they can work with AI. and since I've used AI for a long time, I can tell you I don't rely on AI to be doing creative work by any means, right? It's a tool, no different than programming or whatever. It's maybe a more elaborate tool, but nevertheless, it's not a creative entity by any means. And you need to have to work with real people that can think and imagine things that may not be real, but imagine it and have that open dialogue, right? That collaborative. I mean, nothing more fun than sitting on set on a live action film with a bunch of people talking about, your film, the film you're working on, right? You make some dumb suggestion, and next thing you know, we're shooting it, right? But being able to take that risk and not be afraid to raise the question and raise the objection, right? I'll give you this very short story. I used to give talk a lot in university. I remember I was in university in China, the top university called Tsinghua University. And at the end of my talk, the kids asked me, "What's your secret formula to success?" I said, "First thing is I could have never gotten to this school because you guys are way smarter than me. But one thing I know I'm better than all of you at, I can make mistake faster than any of you." Right? Because by trying things out, not be afraid to try something out, make a mistake and learn from it, and talk to people about it and exchange idea and help each other overcome their mistake, to me is the magic formula that I think we still oftentimes people miss today, right? Because people use social network, and that's not a real communication channel for creative idea because it's very short. You need really extensive, long conversation where you're really collaborating and working together. It may not have to be a big team, but even a small team, a small handful of people, challenge each other, back each other up, and and the world's shifting toward a very vertical structure. You know, a lot of big company now is very vertical. When I run a company, I like to run it as a very horizontal company. Because I remember I was temporarily running a company in Asia, and people were all kissing up to me, say, "You're the CEO, you're the big boss, you know, we'll do whatever you to make you look good." I said, "That's so backward. My job as the boss to make you successful. That's how we build a strong company. If all of you are successful, we'll be unbeatable, right?" But you have to break down that vertical, open communication, let people all challenge each other. There's good idea and there's dumb idea. It's okay to have dumb idea because some of it might turn out good.
Making mistakes faster is so far the quote of the session. I think that you're a high quality mistake maker. I think that's a new T-shirt for somebody. Um, but love that, and I love that idea that maybe the instinct towards vertical company building, it should be balanced with more horizontal. I think that's great. I'm gonna bring somebody up to ask a question. Let's see how this works. Jonathan,
Hi.
uh, welcome to the conversation. I think I know your question, but I'd rather you ask it.
Sure. Thank you for having me. And Richard, thank you very much for being with us. I'm very uh, blessed that I got to be here. I speak for everyone when I say that. I'm very excited and moved. My question that I've been wanting to ask this entire time is um, knowing your place where you talked about how you found you went through a transition of doing fine art and then you find yourself working in this company in a new industry and at the cutting edge and building a team. Um, and I guess my question is, how were you able to know your place well that you were at the limit of yourself and you needed somebody else and you knew the right person to choose um, in a way where for an artist, you think you have to do everything yourself because you have something in your mind about what you think you needs to happen, but that creates sabotage. And I've experienced that. So I have a huge appreciation for building teams. I want to understand what has been your methodology, your philosophy, what you've noticed in doing that to accomplish what you have done.
Huh, For me, sorry, my dog's barking in the background. My real belief is you have to be very thorough when you meet somebody and understand that it's not about them, it's not about their own ego, but it's work with people who are willing to collaborate, right? And willing to learn. That's the key thing, right? We used to hire young kids and other studio wouldn't hire them because they, oh, you don't have the experience. For me, it's not about the experience, but the willingness to learn. Because what they don't know, I can teach them, or at least what we do. But what I want that person to do is have the imagination to go beyond what we have accomplished, right? When I hire anybody, I always said, hopefully you can add something to our table that we couldn't put on the table, right? So you want people who are from very diverse interests and background, but willing to collaborate. And and I always tell them, like, I still remember when we are in the visual effects animation business, I always say, oh yeah, you know, this Pixar or ILM's going to kick our butt on this because they got all these really top-notch people. I say, look, we might not be as skilled and expertise at this one individual, so I know most of them, they're really amazing people. But I can tell you, as a team, we can do whatever they can do just as well, if not better, right? So you really want to empower your team to contribute in a way that support each other but challenge each other, right? And you need to find people who can put their ego aside because nowadays, especially since social media, people tend to have ego that are really weird, hard to manage. But you want people who really put that hat aside and be able to roll the sleeve up, you know, and we did something that helped that. This is a side story, sorry. And we made everybody cook uh, Friday lunch. A small team would cook Friday lunch for the whole company. And it's interesting how that helped people become much more collaborative because they would get together, a small team would devise somebody cooking a meal for the whole studio. And that lasted till we were actually pretty big. And I hold a record for the worst lunch. So there you go. And but again, it's just getting people to collaborate beyond just your work you're working on, but just on daily things, right? Help understand each other. And that's a skill that's really hard to build. I think there's so many kids nowadays that grew up in the social network world. They don't have that in-person skill that you need to collaborate on. And now, with things all remote, it's a little bit more challenging.
I love that, and great question, Jonathan. I'll drop you off the stage. Um, the and maybe I'm showing my own gray hairs in my beard. I find it interesting that I think I grew up in a still just barely pre-internet time when um, we just had to figure stuff out in person in an office, and there's sort of a lot of chatter about soft skills, sort of being a relearned phase for some generations. That is the onset experience, right? Like it's the thing that a lot of us are, sort of either finding nostalgia for or yearning for. There's the whole world of bedroom filmmakers that just literally have the world at their fingertips to make so much with AI. But it's something that I talk to my students too about in classes I teach, that like that's increasingly, I wouldn't say the easiest thing to do. It's hard to be good at it, but it's increasingly available. The thing that is there's perhaps more exponential opportunities is doing things in teams and finding out what happens when we come together. Alden, were you able to figure out again, we'll probably do a tutorial. People having trouble. There should be a button because obviously I work for Jonathan, but if you want to type in your question here, I will ask it for you. Um, in the meantime, yeah, I think it's called request live call in. Thanks, Sunil.
Yeah.
If you want to try it, I'll see you. But in the meantime, I'm seeing a couple other. Jose had a question. Based on your experience building companies, how would you spot lasting value and a real moat in AI storytelling in such a fast-changing ecosystem, especially for a team with limited resources? Which is like a question a lot of people
Right.
trying to build businesses right now. What might be some insights you have about that?
Having come from a lifetime of building pretty much a service business, that's what I can associate with most, right? Building original content is a very difficult path, right? Having worked in big studio and small studio in various places. To do service business, you have to make your client happy. And that's very difficult for creative people to go from a creative mindset to a service mindset. Because you can have clients that don't know what they want, but they may not agree with you. So learning how to make a client happy so they will pay the bills, for me, was a real learning experience, right? And the reason I wrote that lighting tool, interactive lighting tool, back in the early 80s, is I had a client that couldn't make up her mind. I would spend really a lot of late nights trying to do the lighting that she wants, and then have to change it constantly. So learning how to address the need of other creative people, I think, is a key step to building a business in the creative world. I mean, as much as, we talk about big studio even have that as a big problem, right? How to, make your director happy or make the studio happy, right? Having been in that midst of that, working with director like Spielberg, and Robert Redford and many other big director, I can tell you, the bigger the studio, the more people you have to make happy. And so in any type of creative work, a lot of people think, hey, I can make AI now, I can make the final decision. But it's hard to make money when you're making the final decision. I'll be blunt honest about that. So you have to figure out how you can build a creative workflow that can create something that other people never seen before, so they value it, so you can make money. And then the other able to also adjust, adapt, pivot to make people happy when they don't like what you have, right? And that's the tricky part. I mean, at least coming from my service business background over all these years.
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I think it simultaneously excites us, but it doesn't help us when things keep changing on a monthly
Oh
basis
yeah,
that
weekly
we try to
basis,
establish some
weekly.
weekly,
Yeah,
So I think that is the toughest question, but when you frame it in context of a client-based sort of core business, it starts to maybe bring into focus of like what it looks like when it is a moat, is
Right.
because there's something that they only need you for. So we
Mm.
gotta keep asking that question and keep. And if anybody figures it all out, please share it because I think most of us are working on it. Gavin, I'm going to bring you up, and Alden again. I hope you're finding the button. It seems like a couple of other people it's working for them. Here's Gavin.
Hi. So,
Welcome.
the question that I put in, I had two questions. One was I worked at DreamWorks in the early 2000s when it was visibly ingesting PDI. I don't know how else to express it, but it seemed like that was what was going on. So I wanted to ask you what you learned from, merging corporate cultures, so merging cultures in that sort of technical and creative field. The other question was why ARGB instead of RGBA? Just like it's always bothered me.
Well, first thing is to answer your first question. I was a sort of a rebel in Hollywood. I was an executive in a big studio that actually never signed a contract. I refused to sign the contract because I really don't believe how they like to control people with their contract. Right? You worked in big studios, so you know. But I ended up working, have a good relationship with Jeffrey because he really trusted what I was doing. And my goal was to improve the studio, right? How we can expand and grow and develop new ideas and so forth. But it was an uphill battle because most of Hollywood are very old thinking, very traditional, very structured. And also, you were at DreamWorks, and PDI was not a union shop, by the way. DreamWorks in LA was a union shop.
Well, I was in the R&D department, so I was
R&D,
not
okay.
doing production work, so I was
Yeah.
not unionized.
Okay. So,
But they put us on contracts too, which was the weirdest thing.
yeah, but we were not because we treated our people really well, so there was no need for them to have a, contract, union contract. They tried to unionize us, but nobody ever voted for it because they were getting a better deal without it. So, and because we really gave people a lot of flexibility in how they work, right? Hollywood is a little bit more strict and demanding. I'm not a big fan of the Hollywood model, right? Uh, After I left DreamWorks in 2008, I got to know the people in Hollywood actually from different perspective and realized how fragile that whole Hollywood infrastructure is. So I sort of stayed away from it. Um, there's a lot of okay, PDI rollout software. We used a left-handed system. We didn't use a right-handed system. Plus, a lot of things were weird because of me picking things.
Well, I remember looking at header files that were like 15 years old. And I was integrating with PDI code. It's like, wow.
Yeah, we
That
had
stuff's been
we had
around.
features that still doesn't exist today. Images, instead of having just pixel coordinate, also have window coordinate, which made it scale independent. But modern images don't have that format. So yeah, me and Glenn came out of all those formats. So you can blame me for all that stuff. So
Yeah, no, I worked with some great people from PDI. So no shade on the folks I was working with.
yeah,
Thank you for the question, Gavin.
yeah.
I think we have time for one more. I think I think we've overstayed your welcome, or we've overstayed your privilege to talk with you today. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Gavin. Do you have a follow-up question, or Gavin?
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the question. Thanks for coming today. I will bring up Alden, who has successfully cracked the code, and we've learned that apparently using the iOS app is not a good way to get up on stage on a Riverside. Hey, Alden, thank you
Hello.
for bearing with us. Go ahead.
Thank you guys for being here. And so, Richard, my question was that pipelines and workflows that you develop seem crucial to your success. Are you seeing any pipelines or workflows currently offered as software or SaaS on the market that you find promising, or would you recommend that we build our own?
Well, here's the challenge with AI, right? Having first used neural network 35 years ago, currently we're moving at such a fast pace, especially with all these open source stuff and things like. It's really been challenging to even keep up for me. Maybe I'm just too old. You guys are all younger. You probably do a better job than I can. But like every week, there's a new model that comes out,
Yeah.
and the workflow has to change to adapt to it. And when you make content, you need reproducibility and repeatability, right?
Mm.
If the shots don't line up from last week to this week, then I'm in big trouble, right? And you see it in the final work. So it's a challenge. I haven't solved it, to be honest. And I've seen people who try, but I actually go to a lot of the startup meetup in the Bay Area. And oftentimes you see somebody with some idea, but nobody ever looked at the whole pipeline, right? I'm a complete pipeline person. I go from storyboard to screen. That's how I think about everything I do.
Yeah.
And with AI, nobody even come close yet. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there like Higgsfield, Luma, trying to think, but that's creating very short content for a social network and things like that. But do a real film to be able to build a collaborative framework for people to work together. Because one person making a film is not been worth it in my
Right.
mind. You need a team of people, and nobody really built a collaborative AI framework at this point, right? And to build that, be able to go from beginning to end and maintain the consistency and the quality and across all the shots is something that I think studio haven't addressed yet.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, I I met a lot of the AI people from all over the world, and the AI researcher don't understand the problem at all, right? And they're just people who are really good at math. They know how to write these convolution network or this transformer, and they train all these model, but they don't understand workflow, right? And so I've been trying to talk to them and trying to get them to understand that, yes, think about it. But it's a difficult hurdle because they don't understand what filmmaking is, right? And
Mm.
most of you who learning how to make film or have done filmmaking, you understand the workflow much better. So having more of that dialogue is not happening. I still remember had dinner recently at a conference with a group of AI researcher from the biggest online game company in China, and they knew nothing about the workflow. They just knew how to make AI stuff, right? And boy, that's a lot tough conversation to have, right? When you're that far apart. So it's really, I think, having more discussion between the people who create the work, the creative people, and the people who actually built the technology, hopefully will be more helpful. But it's really hard because these companies don't make money off us. They make money off building giant farm, selling the data. So, which is a hurdle we all face, is how to start those conversations, reach out to them, and really have a dialogue to influence the work they're doing. And I haven't seen that yet. I mean, like people say, "Oh, you can build an agentic network to make a film." I have tried. I tell you, it's like it's far from being able useful to making a film. So,
Okay. What do you think about like Nemo Claw, NVIDIA's OpenClaw offering, and some of their models for video, putting it all together?
okay, Fred, do you have time to say something about AI here? Can I say one thing about AI? Okay.
This is your
Okay.
mic,
Okay.
sir.
Having said I've started using neural network 30 some odd years ago, every time there's a new network that comes out, I'm always testing it, right? Because I understand what's behind it. I'm not a very public figure. I'm not in social network because I'm just too busy all the time. So most of this network will hallucinate about me, right?
Mm.
A few years ago, I gave a talk at a astrophysics program in New Mexico State. A bunch of kids were assigned the task of writing an intro to me. So they got up, gave this beautiful speech about me, and I got up, I say, great use of ChatGPT because everything you said were wrong. Okay. Because because the way AI work is s- based on what data it has, right? This doesn't have a lot of data, it will make up stuff, right? So they said I worked at Pixar, I graduated from Berkeley, and that's false. And I worked with these people, that's also false. They make up all these stories. In fact, still do it today. Most of them still do it today. A lot of on the raw data. I mean, some of these systems they check the internet might stop saying false stuff, but still. So you have to understand AI has a lot of limitation. Even today, as advanced as they are making these amazing picture, your precise control is still far from being precise.
Mm.
So you have to learn how to work around it and accept it for what it is. So I think people have to understand that AI is no different than just a new brush you use to paint with, but has a different set of control. And have they built the control? Still not clear. I mean, especially this agentic network. I mean, to me, I think it's just a scam to sell more computer because agentic network wastes a lot of time doing stupid stuff behind the scene. The reasoning I don't know if you guys ever done this. If you can go on this network deck and you see it do reasoning, watch it do the reasoning to answer your question. And when I asked the question about myself,
Just burning tokens, just
it's
like
just
bye-bye
burning
tokens.
tokens, right? NVIDIA make tons of money off this, right? This whole thing just a way to sell more computer, right? Is It's far from being optimal in thinking and reasoning and identifying things you want, right? It's very brute force. So I think you have to be very cautious. I think the expectation you could build a whole pipeline. I know a lot of people in Hollywood who's trying it right now, and I don't think anybody's that close to it yet. I think building assist tool is the first step. Creating content, I'm still a little bit concerned about where they're going because to build a whole complete pipeline is a much more thorough process that they haven't addressed yet. So
There's so,
Maybe
I mean,
that'll be
again,
your next endeavor.
I'm sorry, Alden, what did you say?
Oh, I just said maybe that'll be your next endeavor.
yeah,
Any luck? Thanks for the question, Alden. I think we're right at time, and I love that so many people have stuck around, which is a tribute to the interest in your story. I mean, I can't help but always wonder, like, just when I think something's not there yet, like, is that the new Will Smith spaghetti? Like, is that the next thing that, of course, in a short matter of time, it does seem like a lot of people are either obsessed with finding ways to burn our tokens, or maybe they're moving this agentic needle forward.
there
Yeah.
will be ways. I can
Yeah.
guarantee that. It just
The thing
my brain is too old and too slow to come up with it. But I think a lot of you will have those ideas, and don't hesitate to ask people about
I mean, just on the last thought, with someone as much perspective as you have, just something that's dawning on me, like every now and then I just see like the sort of oh, look how far we've come. And then like, I remember the first time I watched like an AI generated image of like a wild animal, like something that normally shows up in a nature film. And I'm just like, wow, that's incredible. Like that's but then I'm like, well, what do we need this for? Like, there are gorillas in the world, and maybe it's really special that somebody actually captured them on film because they're endangered or something. So every now and then I just go back and forth, like the technical achievement versus it's sort of like, which I guess is good. So then if somebody wants to put a gorilla in their commercial, they don't need to wrangle a gorilla. But so it's interesting. I just wonder, like, does like some Gen Alpha kid arrive at the moment that like the agentic thing, it just makes movies in front of you, and then they just like pick up a camera and they're like, well, so does this thing.
yeah.
Like this makes movies too, and I just pointed at real people, and I don't need to generate anything. I don't know. I'm just wondering. Every now and then, I'm just like, to your point about doing something that's impossible.
Yeah.
So doing
I
something
mean,
that
I'll go back to, I'm the old guy. I'll go back to my old time story. I still remember first taking art class in college. Right, one of the first class you do in art class in college is you go into a museum, you start copying other people's work. Okay, that's how we learn. And after you got good at it, you go, so what's it? I'm just copying somebody's work. Then you realize you have to now use this up here to imagine something different that bring out your emotion, bring out your value, right? And that's what art's about. It's about you expressing yourself, not copying somebody's work. Copying is just a step in learning, right?
It's a practice. So I mean, like little kids trace.
Yeah.
It's good to trace because you get fine motor skills. Anyway, I could talk to you forever because your perspective is deep. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My
I'm
pleasure.
so grateful for making the introduction. We're so lucky to learn from you and to hear those stories firsthand.
I want to learn from all of you.
Well, you're very welcome. I mean, I know Min's got a lot of events popping off in SF. There's some San Francisco people here. We would be very lucky to have you join us as a mentor, as a participant, all of the above. A highlight of my week to get to really spend time with you today.